You know, what if I told you that one of the single most important verses used to argue that Jesus claims to be God might be based on a huge misunderstanding? Today, we are going to peel back the layers of translation, go right back to the original languages, and see what the Bible actually says in one of its most debated moments.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the famous claim itself. Then we'll dig into that supposed I am connection. After that, we'll get into the weeds with some linguistic and contextual problems, see why the statement might actually be incomplete, and then finally, we'll put it all together for a fresh look at what Jesus really said.
All right, let's just jump right into the deep end. We're in the Gospel of John, chapter 8. Things are getting heated between Jesus and the religious leaders, and it all comes to a head with this one single line. Before Abraham was, I am? I mean, wow. That is a mind-bending thing to say. And for centuries, the common understanding has been that when Jesus says, I am, he's making a direct claim to be God himself. You know, Yahweh, the God who spoke to Moses out of the burning bush. And let's be real, this is not some minor theological point. For many, this is it. This is the cornerstone for the entire doctrine of the deity of Christ. But, and this is the big question for us today, does that connection actually stand up to scrutiny when we put it under a linguistic microscope? To figure that out, we have to do what any good detective would do. We have to go back to the source. We're going to look past our English Bibles and check out the original Hebrew of the Old Testament and the Greek of the New Testament. And trust me, this is where it starts to get really, really interesting. And boom, here's the first major revelation. The phrases just aren't the same. In the Greek New Testament, Jesus says, ego eimi, which is honestly a super common way to just say, I am. But back in the Hebrew Old Testament, God's statement is ehyeh asher ehyeh, which really means something more like, I will be what I will be. Linguistically, we're talking about two totally different statements.
And that discovery immediately leads to an even bigger question. Was I am even used as a name or a special divine title for God anywhere else in the Bible? Because if it wasn't, well, the whole foundation for the traditional argument starts to look a little shaky. So let's pull on that thread a little more. Because that initial language mismatch, that's just the tip of the iceberg. When we start looking at the bigger picture, both linguistically and in the context of the rest of the Bible, the case against the traditional view gets a whole lot stronger.
Okay, so this is critical. The Greek phrase ego eimi is used all over the place in the New Testament, and it's almost always in a totally normal way. Get this, in the very next chapter of John, there's a man who was born blind and then healed. When people ask him, are you the guy? He answers with the exact same Greek phrase, ego eimi, I am. He's definitely not claiming to be God. The simple truth is that I am just wasn't used as a divine title in either language. And you know what's really wild? The traditional interpretation actually creates contradictions within the very same conversation. In that chapter, Jesus repeatedly calls himself a man who got his information from God. He says he does nothing on his own authority. That seems to run completely counter to the idea that he's also claiming to be the God who gives that authority in the first place. And the evidence just keeps piling up. After Jesus' resurrection, you have the Apostle Peter speaking to a crowd. And he says very clearly that the God of Abraham glorified his servant, Jesus. Peter draws a really distinct line there. You've got the God of Abraham on one side and his servant, Jesus, on the other. He doesn't present them as the same person. Okay, so if the evidence is pointing away from Jesus claiming to be God, then what on earth was he saying? Well, the answer might be in a simple piece of grammar. His statement is unfinished. Seriously, think about it. If I walk up to you and just say, I am, you'd be like, you are what? Tired? Hungry? The mailman? The phrase needs something to complete it. It needs a predicate. Without that extra piece, it's just hanging there. So to figure out what Jesus meant, we need to find the context that finishes his sentence.
And the crazy thing is, we don't have to search far. The entire long, intense debate in John chapter 8 was kicked off by this one statement from Jesus, right at the very beginning of the chapter. I am the light of the world. This is so important. This whole chapter isn't just a random collection of arguments. No, it's one long, continuous sermon that flows from that one central idea, and that really suggests that everything Jesus says later, including that final dramatic line, is meant to point back to that main theme. You know, in literary studies, there's a name for this. It's called an inclusio. You can think of it like bookends for a conversation.
The author starts with an idea, I'm the light of the world, and then closes the whole thing by pointing right back to it. It's a powerful clue that Jesus is wrapping up his sermon by hammering home the same point he started with.
Now there is one last, absolutely crucial piece of this puzzle. It's a clue that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time, inside a single Greek word that almost always gets mistranslated. A word that, once you understand it, changes the entire meaning of the verse.
That word is genestai. In most of our Bibles, it's translated as was, as in before Abraham was. But if you actually look at how that word is used everywhere else in John's Gospel, it consistently refers to something coming into being in the future. So this flips the meaning from before Abraham existed way back when to before Abraham comes to be sometime in the future. So when you put all of these pieces together, a completely new reading starts to emerge. Jesus could be saying, before Abraham comes to be in the resurrection of the dead, I am the light of the world. He isn't talking about his existence in the past. He's making a powerful claim about his importance right now and how it relates to a future event that was at the very heart of Jewish hope, the resurrection. So what's the big takeaway here? When we actually set aside the traditions and just look at the raw data, the grammar, the literary structure, the context of the original text, a totally different but completely consistent meaning appears, and it forces us to ask a much bigger question. How many other things we believe about these ancient texts might look different if we dared to go back to the source?